Welcome into another edition of Warchant TV. This is Ira Shofa with Corey Clark. We've got a special guest that I'm sure a lot of people who either lived in Tallahassee or have spent time in Tallahassee or been around the community are very familiar with. Gary Jordan, who has done a lot of marketing and television work. He's an author. And back in the day in 1985, what we brought him in here to discuss was he spent a season behind the scenes of Florida State football and got to chronicle the Bowden way, or got to kind of experience an inside look at Florida State football in the mid 80s, right before the dynasty was starting to take off. So we wanted to kind of revisit that with him, get the behind the scenes story of the behind the scenes access. And Gary was nice enough to join us here for a little bit and reflect on that. Thanks for joining us, Gary.
Happy to be here, guys. Yeah, that was right before things kind of took off. It was the year he went out to Nebraska and beat Nebraska. And things kind of took off from there.
So, and Corey and I both have a lot of questions. I've watched it. Corey was a Florida State fan at the time, so he's got different recollections as well. I was not really into college football at that point. But how did the access come about? Did you just, and I did get to cover Coach Bowden for some of his later years, and obviously he was known as one of the most accessible coaches in America. But when you watch this video, which is still available on YouTube, and we'll put the link in the description later and everything, but how did you approach him with the idea? How did that conversation come about?
It was great. It was because he was as accessible as he is and always has been. And it was an idea that I had, and it had never been done before. In fact, cameras were not even allowed between the 40s on the field in college football up until then. And the technology for the coach to wear a wireless and to have that broadcast was just in its embryonic stages all across the country. So nobody had really done that, and nobody had done it with a college football coach. So I just kind of figured he was the perfect one. And I literally went into his office and said, "Look, I've got an idea. You want to try this?" And he said, "Sure." And the only rule he had was that he wouldn't have the ability to make any changes, but we'd give him the right to watch it when it was over. And if there was something that really bothered him, we could talk about it. And he accepted that. So he put a wireless mic on before the first game and wore it for the entire season. Hotel rooms, coaches' meetings, car rides, locker rooms, the works. It was pretty cool.
Did you, when you brought up the idea, number one, were you a part, who paid for you guys to go to Lincoln? Did you get to fly on the team plane? Because you're in the locker room and you're on the sidelines in Lincoln, Nebraska for I think that was the second game of the season that year. Who footed the bill?
Yeah, Corey, the other thing we had to do was go to my bosses at public television and get them to cover the cost. So we just went, public television covered all our travel and everything else. So we were, it's funny, when you're around somebody long enough with a camera, you kind of they stop looking at you, become a fly on the wall. And that's what we wanted to achieve. So we were there enough to where they stopped paying attention to us. And that's really when we got the great stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you're in his office when Burt Reynolds is sitting there shooting the bull with him. You're in his motel room in Thomasville, Georgia, the night before a game. Was it, how long did it take before you, not only Coach Bowden, but I'm sure he could feel comfortable in any situation, before, assistant coaches and players and everybody kind of accepted that you were there, or how quickly or how long did that take?
That took a few games. But for a coach, it was really kind of at the end of the Nebraska game, which was kind of the first big road game. And he was pretty cool with it after that. But I would say probably it all happened pretty quickly. They were pretty focused on football. They were just turning that corner. I mean, their only 3 losses that year were Florida, tough game, Miami, incredibly close game, and Auburn, which was a very unfortunate blowout that I unfortunately had something to do with.
I was at that game at Auburn, and it was 31-27 with 5 or 6 minutes left or 8 minutes left, and then all Hades broke loose and they scored 28 straight points.
Yeah, it kind of turns out that Jordan-Hare Stadium is all concrete. It's one of the only all concrete stadiums in the country. In fact, I don't know if there's another one. So while, we see Doak Campbell and other stadiums with their metal rafters, because it was all concrete, the signal because this was all new technology. I mean, we literally had a wireless mic on Coach on his belt. And then my camera was probably 15 feet away from him. And I had a cameraman and then an audio guy. And I'm up in the press box at Auburn. There was no reason for me to be on the sidelines. And a lot of things fell apart. He called a fake punt, and it got blocked for a touchdown, and then another interception for a touchdown. It was a pretty easy pick, and then Bo Jackson goes 75 yards. I mean, it turned ugly, you're right, in a hurry. I'm up in the press box, and I hear, you guys been in enough press boxes, there's like a little commotion going on the other end. And I said to the guy next to me, what's going on? He says, the Auburn coaches are hearing all of Bowden's plays on 94.9. And it started transmitting on FM radio. So all his plays were being heard. So I pick up the walkie-talkie and I screamed, because that's all we had then. I screamed to my guys, turn it off, turn it off. And they can't hear me. I hear them back because the crowd's so loud because they're scoring touchdowns every 41 seconds. And so the guys are screaming back, what? So it took me about 15 minutes to get down there. I had to go through press passes and across the other sideline because the press box was on the opposite side. And I ran up to Coach and dove at him and literally just ripped it off his belt. He's like, what? And I said, nothing, just a little technical problem. So later the next morning, we were back in Tallahassee, and he called me into his office, and he said, I'm hearing rumors that they could hear my plays, the broadcast. And I said, Coach, that technically cannot happen. I mean, it's like a 1 watt signal. That's just the kind of thing you hear. Those are the kind of rumors when the game happens. I go, okay. So fast forward, I don't know how many years it was till Terry got the job at Auburn. So Terry Bowden is now the Auburn coach. And one of the first things he tells his dad is, yeah, all the coaches were telling me about today they could hear your plays over the radio. That must have been 10 years later, and Bowden called me and he wanted to see me, and I went and saw him. He said, Terry tells me they could hear that back then. I said, yeah, they could. He said, you lied to me. And I said, yeah, Coach, I had 2 young kids. You had killed me. Everybody in town had killed me. The only option was to lie. He goes, okay, good point.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It really happened.
You might have got shut down that week.
The show would have been over, yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think, obviously Bo Jackson and the Auburn's team was pretty good too. But it's funny watching that pregame talk where, everybody thinks of Coach Bowden. Certainly, even in his heyday, a lot of times people think of Coach Bowden as an offensive mind, a genius when it comes to that, the risk taker, the riverboat gambler, all those things. But what really comes across in some of those pregame speeches is just how he demanded physicality. And, he was basically challenging the team to make Bo Jackson not want to go back in the game. And he focused so much on physicality and toughness and all those things you see as part of the dynasty era. But I think a lot of times we credit that to Mickey Andrews, or we credit that to Jim Gladden, or we credit to different coaches, or Chuck Amato. But really, a lot of that really comes from Coach Bowden, even though I don't know if that's how people perceived him. Did you feel that way?
Now listen to me. Make Bo Jackson take himself out of the ball game like he did against Tennessee. The coaches didn't take him out. He said, coaches, I'm not going back in. My leg hurts. Well, he might have said my leg smarts. I'm not sure which one. But he wouldn't go back. Now, men, make him take himself out again. And that ain't going to come easy. He's got to know that he's going through 60 minutes of hell if he stays out there.
Well, I didn't when I went in, but I did when I left. He would constantly tell the running backs in the locker room, and we had like 95 hours of stuff. So the documentary, the one that we sent, was 90 minutes. So figure it out. There was a lot of things nobody got to see that were just amazing things.
We want the hidden tapes.
Yeah, well,
the other 94 hours.
Yeah, the phrase he kept using was "no more fancy Dana." That's what anytime a running back would come up to the line and fancy Dan, dance side to side. That used to really piss him off. He was a guy. He wanted people to hit. He wanted people to get in there, and he wanted to establish that. So you're exactly right. He was fierce about the physicality of the game. he was so good at being affable that you just really never got that. And he was also a really brilliant tactician, and we know his offensive mind. Before the Nebraska game, there had never been a shovel pass in the history of football. No one ever done that before. And before the Nebraska game, we are down underneath the tunnel with the officials.
Well, there's a couple things I need to mention to you. We will shovel pass. Yes, sir. And we might drop that ball on the ground, but it's a pass. It ain't no problem.
Sure enough, in the game, and you can see this on the show, he calls a shovel pass. It gets dropped. Nebraska recovers it, and they call it a fumble. Nebraska's ball. Bowden rips his headset off and runs out to the 50.
Hey, I don't want him in. No, it's our ball. It's an incomplete pass. It's our ball. It's our, it's our ball. Hey, he called it our ball. That's ridiculous. Hey, up. Shovel is an incomplete pass. Get out of the way.
He's in the official's face, and they changed the call. There was a lot of that kind of thing that I think really were insights into who he was. If he didn't lose 15 pounds a game, I'd be stunned. He was constant motion on the sidelines.
He's a frenetic ball of energy, and I think a lot of people watching this right now, I would urge them, stop watching this. Go back and watch that documentary. It is not the Bobby Bowden that you saw later in life. It is an up and down, sideline to sideline. He's not standing at the 10 just writing in his notebook. This is a guy that is talking to everyone on the field. It's like a frenetic, like I said, it's like a frenetic, almost nervous energy where he has to go. He'll say the same thing 12 times in a row. Touchdown, onside kick. Touchdown, onside kick.
Cheer it up, let's go. We go onside. Score, touchdown, onside kick. Score, touchdown, onside. Score, touchdown, and onside kick. We score, touchdown, onside kick. Still winning.
And it's just such a neat perspective of a guy that, his teams became better as he got older. And he kind of got a little less involved offensively, so people almost think of him as a grandfather. But that dude was involved in everything. And in that locker room, he's telling them, look, Bo Jackson took himself out of the Tennessee game. Mm-hmm. He took himself out of that game. Why don't you make him take himself out of this game too? Now, that's not the Bobby Bowden that we see after a game, the affable guy, but he's competitive, number one. And like Ira said, he's really preaching physicality. And I think this is a great moment in time, just an hour and 15-minute snapshot of an all-time great coach right before he burst onto the national scene with great, great teams. But to see how it got there, this was the birth of it, really. I mean, I know he had the 79 and 80 teams, but this 85 class was the one that ended up starting the dynasty. So I just think it's a really neat snapshot in time. And it does – I think it makes Bowden look great. I think people that know Bowden from the 1995 on don't realize what kind of power personality he had and how kind of just not – he was always charismatic. He always had that. But just the force of his nature on his sideline. He is the guy you hear up and down the sideline. And that's not the picture we got the last, 20 years of his career.
Yeah, that's really true. And the other thing that came out, I'll speak to that. And the other part of that was really interesting to me was how he rolled that into compassion for his players. You remember that Auburn game?
Yeah.
Danny McManus got his bell rung. I mean, he had a concussion, and he was just calling ridiculous plays. I mean, he was not running the play that was called.
Right.
And Bowden kept going, Danny, you okay, buddy?
Danny, you okay? Are you okay, son?
This is Disney supposed to keep on going off and on.
Well, hell, I can't. You got to tell me whether it'll take you out or not.
No, I'm okay.
Well, I mean, we just lost 7 points. You sure you're okay? Just be sure to let me know. I'm taking your word.
Okay.
Danny, we can't afford to blotch anymore.
I know.
He'd go out 10 yards onto the field when Danny was coming off, but is you okay, buddy? Everything all right? And he goes and sits down. He goes back over and finds him on the bench. He says, buddy, you need to tell me if you're not okay because, some bad things are happening out there and you need to let me know. And he says, I'm okay, coach. And he goes, okay, buddy, we're right there with you. And he turns around. He's looking for Brad Scott to go ahead and get, Eric in the game. Find Eric Thomas. He knew. but he was compassionate with his player, but he was there. But the fierceness, I think the North Carolina game really kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about, because in that North Carolina game, he was all over the officials. He was all over his coaches. He was all over everybody. And he knew that he had to do that in order to get the desired result. But the truth was that he knew he had to do that to get the desired result. As soon as he gets done just wailing away on the official, he turns back towards the camera, well, actually towards the coaches, but the camera was there, and he just says, you know, he starts giggling.
Don't let him hold!
Let's go deep. What's the hold
I feel so guilty.
He knew that he had to just go out there and wail away on his good buddy, Tommy Rose, who was the head official. He was good friends with Tommy Rose. And he's out there, Tommy Rose, they're holding. You know, he's screaming at him left and right, and then he turns back and starts laughing about it. He was pretty much in control, but he was fierce.
As Corey mentioned, the documentary is still WFSU posted. It's on YouTube. It's called Bobby Bowden Finding a Way, I believe is the title. If you want to find
There's a reason I picked that. Yeah.
Okay. What was the reason for the name?
They had a sign that was
the motto, right?
out of the locker room, and every player came out onto the field
Touched it.
and hit that sign, and the sign said "Find a Way."
Gotcha.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
No, that was really a philosophy. Is that somehow something was going to happen in that game that could be the difference in the game. You just had to find a way.
Yeah, and and to the point Corey was making before about his energy, it's almost chaotic. You know, I mean, he is it's like his mind moves so fast, as you can see, but it's like he verbalizes whatever he's thinking. So when he calls that fake punt at Miami,
I know.
Did he go on 3, you guess?
I was talking to the punt team. You still want the fake punt?
No, it's 4th down.
Okay, I'm talking about. No, that's third.
Hey, Wayne.
Don't get it.
Let's go for the fake punt if we don't make it.
No. Let's go ahead and kick it. Let's say the fake punt.
All right, fake punt. Fake punt. Red, fake punt. Fake punt. Fake punt. Fake punt. Fake punt now. You got it?
Yeah, I do.
and you think about like in today's football, where they're covering their mouths and everything's top secret. Coach Bowden's running around telling everybody on the team we're going to run a fake punt.
He's screaming it.
Yeah, and I mean it worked to perfection, but it's just it was like he talked himself through things. I was curious. You're a communicator. I mean, by profession, did the players? Sometimes he talks so fast, it's like hard to follow what he's saying. Did you feel like it was effective at times, or did you feel like they were confused at times? Because he'll in the middle of a sentence he jumps to something else or changes course.
Well, I think it worked because it was just the end result of what had been a boatload of preparation.
Mm.
I mean, every player knew exactly what was expected of him, and the plays were designed. I mean, they especially the first series. You know, that first series was designed no matter what, and so I think everybody knew kind of what it was. It's just when he decided to do it, it got him all excited, and that Miami game was a perfect example. He is literally, you're right, running up and down the sideline screaming fake punt, because he knew it was the right moment to do it, and he didn't want to take any chances that anybody didn't hear that that's what we're doing. But it wasn't that he had to let them know how to do it.
I gotcha. And
that's the difference.
And I think that's a good point. And it really comes across later when they later in the season, Hassan Jones comes over to him and is telling him the play. He's like, Coach,
If you run it out of R tight, it's there, Coach.
Huh? What's that?
If you run it out of R tight, 46, Z takeoff.
Lloyd on the carry.
Okay. How much we need?
By Williams.
but Coach Bowden doesn't even discuss it with him. He's like, okay, and he just makes the call. He calls the play that Hassan Jones wanted to call, and it works perfectly. But the idea that a player would be that smart and know exactly, I was impressed by that, and it goes to the preparation you're talking about.
Well, I put that in there because of that, because I had another hour of those.
Yeah.
And I couldn't make the show that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I put that in there because he did that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say there were probably 3 or 4 times that Deion Sanders called a defense. Mm-hmm. I would say that there were at least 3 or 4 times that Eric Thomas or McManus would call a play on the sidelines with him and go, and he was always receptive to it. I think he understood that they saw the field differently than he did. But I think more than that, he was open to, as brilliant as he was offensively, he relied a lot on his coaches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've got a bunch of footage where his coaches talked him out of doing something, or he listened to a coach and did what they said. I mean, it was, but it was a product of them having been in the hotel room the night before and going over all the options. I mean, that was chalkboard stuff, literally a chalkboard.
Yeah.
I mean, not like you see today. And so I think at the time, I think I called it something like calculated genius. He was really, really smart, but he knew when to listen to other people.
I think going back to the Miami game, I think probably my favorite sequence of the whole documentary, and I was going to ask you about it because it's I guess a decision you made as a producer director, is right when Florida State's blocking those 2 straight Miami punts. They block it, the place goes nuts. Then you realize, it didn't count. It was a delay of game. And then Bowden is talking to Chip Ferguson out of camera view. I think he goes behind the sideline onto the bench.
Chip! Get him, Foy! Chip! Now listen, if we start off with an R, 200, red 200 X sign, Z post and X square in. So if they're blitz, we get that Z post for a touchdown. We'll get Z post for a touchdown, okay? R, red, 200 X sign, Z post. Z, now for a minute, if they're blitz, we get Z for a touchdown. If they're zone it, we get X on the square in. Okay? All right, now we might not call that. That'd be the call. Good job, man. Pull that.
It's almost like he looked up and went, we scored a touchdown. Cool. Anyway, Chip, back to, like, it didn't affect him at all. It didn't even slow down his thought process of what he was trying to communicate to his quarterback.
For a second.
Really neat.
Yeah, for a second when you're watching it, it almost feels like, does he not realize they just got another touchdown? It's
right.
Because he's so focused on that play call.
He didn't realize they got another touchdown.
Okay.
He didn't. It was, if I had continued to use that segment, about 25 seconds later, he went up to Brad Scott and said, "So what happened with all that?" So
right.
I just, I didn't have room for it. But no, he didn't. In the frenzy of what was happening, he did not know that and that's why I ran it the way I ran it, because his audio was critical. I mean, the fact that he was so focused on what he needed to do next was a very cool thing. And, it was so easy to follow the drama of those big games. But I thought some of the coolest moments were against Tulsa or some of those teams where he, in the hotel room the night before, would literally diagram a play and say, look, if this happens, it's a touchdown.
Yeah.
I was just watching a Greg Maddux documentary, and he was saying, or Bobby Cox was saying that he went to the mound and said to Maddux, maybe we should put this guy on. And Maddux said, no, I'm going to throw him these 2 pitches, and on the 3rd pitch, he's going to pop out to third. And, he threw the 2 pitches. On the 3rd pitch, the guy popped out to third. There are some things in sports that are so predictably automatic when you're that good. And then, he draws this Tulsa play. The safety does exactly what he wanted the safety to do.
Yeah.
McManus goes over the top to the tight end and touchdown, exactly like he drew it up the night before. I thought those were kind of the most interesting parts of it.
Those halftime speeches, and you're getting such highs and lows. I mean, during the course of a season, and they had some great comebacks in those games. But I mean, he gets so hard on them sometimes. Like he's, when they're getting beat at Gainesville, he's basically challenging. I mean, almost kind of challenging their manhood.
Are you scared? Don't say that. Don't answer. Don't answer. Are you scared? You scared of them yellow shirts? Them orange shirts out there scare you a little bit? Intimidate you? Are you going to let them kick your butt like that?
It's whatever the situation called for. There were things that he was particular about, but only a couple. I mean, in the final cut of the documentary, I had him spitting about 5 times, and I had him saying the word damn 3 times. And when I let him see it before it aired, he said, "Do I cuss that much?" I said, "Oh, well, no. I mean, I think there were only 4 dams all season." He says, "Well, you know, if you put 3 of them in 90 minutes, it makes me look like a cusser."
Right.
He said, "Do I spit that much?" And I said, "Well, no. I mean, but, you know, if you got 5 spits, it looks like I spit." So I actually took 4 spits out, and I took 2 dams and edited the word dadgummit into those spots. So 2 of those dams were dadgummits, and one of them I kept a dam, and that was our negotiated settlement. He was as fierce or nasty as he needed to be in the moment. And when somebody needed if a player through effort didn't accomplish something, he was compassionate. If a player through lack of effort didn't accomplish something, then he was dynamic. It just, whatever was needed at the time. I mean, there were a lot of players who failed, but not through lack of effort. And he embraced those players.
I thought I really enjoyed not the game itself or the outcome, but the halftime of the like Ira said, of the Florida game. You know, you don't usually see that. Bowden was angry, like furious. Like, you know, part of it was the context of he had already lost to him 4 years in a row. I think it was 4 years in a row at that point. That was an all-time that was a very good Florida team. That might have been the best team they'd ever had up until Spurrier got there. But still, they're down 28-0 at half, right?
One of the best teams money could buy.
Yeah.
Well, sure. And by the way, I wanted to bring it up. Do you think after the game when he goes up to Galen Hall and he says something to the effect like, "Boy, you got a good team. I wish you guys could keep playing." Was that a veiled shot at him? Because obviously, for the people that don't know, Florida was on probation. They couldn't be on TV. They couldn't play in a bowl.
Exactly what it was.
Was that a veiled shot, you think? Like,
yeah.
Hey, man. Okay.
When you're with him for 95 hours, you realize he's got a shiv. He just decides when to use it. I mean, he knows where to stick it when it needs to be. He's always looking a little bit further down the road. I'm going to see this guy again. I want to establish this with this guy, especially with coaches. He had enormous respect for everything in Nebraska. The coaches, the players, the fans. I didn't get a sense that he had that same respect for Miami or for Florida, and he absolutely had it for Auburn and Nebraska. Just the way they went about their business, the way they played ball, the way they handled themselves, and he did not have that for those other 2 schools.
And so going back to that halftime of that Florida game, now they didn't come back and win. They still got beat soundly. But he was so angry at being down 28-0, and he let them know it. You know, he had talked to them before the game about being intimidated, and he had let them know it, that he thought they were intimidated 2 years ago when they got there. And then this time they come in and they're down 28-0 at half. And that's, I think, probably as mad as you'll ever – it's like after the Miami game, I think he was devastated. Like that was just a hurt, a sadness. They played hard. They lost to a good team. I think he thought his team kind of folded in the first half of that Florida game, and he let them know it.
Yeah, if you watch the locker room after the Miami game, totally different guy. He's got the Coke in his hand, and he's just saying, you know, I believe I let you boys down. I believe you played well enough to win. I believe that one's on me. It was just we went to war. We didn't get it done, but boy, that was a great game. No, in Florida, it was the only time during the year, with the exception of the North Carolina halftime. In North Carolina, he felt like he should have been up 35-0. Yeah. And he was in a war, and that really pissed him off. But I think in the Florida game, it was the only time he felt like he had been out-coached, outplayed. His players didn't bring it from the locker room onto the field. Just none of the things he had thought were going to happen happened. And I know that because I was in the highway patrol car with him between Tallahassee and Gainesville. And boy, he felt like we're ready for him. We got it. So I think Florida was one of those games. I mean, he knew when he went to Auburn, he knew when he went to Nebraska, and he knew in the Miami game that he was going to have a war. He really felt like going to that Florida game that they were going to pull that off.
Yeah.
So you're right. He was pissed.
One of the another one of the cool things, and we talked about his mind moving so fast, but like one of the criticisms a lot of times fans have or media have of coaches is when they get into a situation and they clearly haven't thought like a play ahead or 2 plays ahead. You know, they wait to see what happens and then they have to figure out what they're going to do. And maybe they'll call a timeout or they get to play in late. You see him throughout this documentary, talking through what's going to happen if they don't get a first down here. What are they going to do the next play? And you know, so you get some really cool moments. Like I think it was like a 4th and 2, or it might have been at Auburn, where it's like a 3rd and short, and he's like, if we don't get it, we want to go with a Ruski, and they act like they're going to run it up the middle on 4th and 2 at their own 40-yard line. Auburn completely sells that out to stop the run. They stop the run. You hear the crowd cheer. Meanwhile, they got a receiver streaking down, and they hit the big play. Mm-hmm. But what's cool is you guys have a camera on Coach Bowden, like that whole sequence leading up to it, and then in the immediate aftermath of it. So you get to see some things that we never get to see. You know, you just never get to see that on television. Like you said earlier, you know, you had cameras between the 40s, but also you have a cameraman who's, I guess you've instructed them ahead of time, no matter what happens, kind of keep focusing on Coach Bowden or what's happening on the sidelines.
Oh yeah, I told my cameraman, you have an audience of 1. Camera stays on him no matter what happens. I don't care. You know, they could be given CPR to a guy next to him. Camera stays on Bowden, and it led to a couple incredibly poignant shots. And one of them is in the documentary when that Auburn game was so far out of hand at the end. There was about 45 seconds left in the game, and he was all alone on the sideline, kneeling and just contemplating what had just happened. Of course, he didn't know they had all their plays, but that's another story. but from his perspective, it was really kind of poignant moment. But he was always a couple plays ahead, and so staying on him was always a precursor. It actually made editing the documentary a little easier because you'd hear him go, "Oh yeah, okay, that's coming in a couple plays." Yeah, I can tell you that I didn't leave there with less respect for him. I really fell in love with the guy through the documentary because you realize what a cool guy he was, that he understood when he called a trick play that it was his ass on the line.
Yeah.
He knew that, and he
That's
embraced
why they called it a Bowden Ruski, right? So it couldn't
Yeah,
be confused with somebody else's decision.
It was the reason he named it that.
When you're the head football coach and you put in plays like that, your coaches all kind of turn their head and laugh, you know, which I used to do when I was an assistant. See, you're nearly ashamed to approach them with it. And so I've stuck my name on it and told my coaches and the players, if it don't work, I'm the guy that's to blame. Y'all don't have to take the blame for it.
So that was always something he did. But I'll tell you guys, on my desk in my office is a football that he signed for me at the end of when we were all done with everything. And the football says, Gary, great show. Let's never do it again. That's awesome. True. We became great friends. We became great friends, and we golfed together and did a lot of things after. We're still friends to this day. But awesome. Yeah, that was not. We both had enough of each other.
And I can't overstate how much you get a glimpse into his personality as a person. Again, he wasn't a grandfather yet. Now, he might have technically been a grandfather at that point. Yeah. I assume he definitely was.
No, not at all.
Was he not? So, but
wait, Terry might have had a kid by then. Yeah,
he wasn't the grandfatherly guy that just coached his coaches and kind of stood on the sideline. And what I thought was awesome was after the Nebraska game, when they're all coming into the locker room, you know, we all have this image of Bowden from like the 1997 coaches show where he's like, there's old so-and-so. He's from Pahokee. His mama was in last night, but he has trouble remembering their names. Well, 55-year-old or 54-year-old Bobby Bowden didn't have trouble with any of that. They all come into the locker room, and one by one, he's hugging them and saying, there you are, Eric. There you are, Paul. Great game. Any kid that didn't even play. Just everybody that came in, he wanted them to share in the success of that game, even if they didn't have a huge impact in that game. I love that moment. And then, man, it was also a part of the St. Bobby and the Barbarians, the 91 book that came out following the 91.
Yeah, love that.
His pregame prayer or postgame prayer is always something like, Dear Lord, Thank you to the Gator Bowl for inviting us to the Gator Bowl. You know, it would always start. It had great sentiment, but it'd be keep our quarterbacks healthy and make sure they see the reads correctly. Like he'd always make the prayer somewhat about football or the Gator Bowl or something random, and I thought that was just a really neat part of the documentary too.
Thanks. He never quit coaching. He was coaching them at dinner. He was coaching,
Right.
you know, in the hotel rooms. He never quit coaching. I just heard a story about Shula where he was having a curfew problem on the road, and he gave a football to be signed. He gave it to the doorman, said any player who comes in after 11 p.m., have him sign the football and autographed football. And then the next morning he stood up in the bus and he had the football and said, hey, if your name's on this football, you're not playing today.
Wow.
That was Bowden. I mean, you know, he was always thinking 3 steps ahead of the game, how to manage people. He knew he had teenagers. He never lost sight of that. He always understood the good that came with that and the bad that came with that and the things they needed to look out for. And, it's how you can take a Ron Simmons with, Tyrannosaurus Rex arms and make him one of the greatest players in football. He knew exactly what kind of situations to put him in and made all those kind of things work. Deion just didn't become a great cornerback because he's one of the greatest athletes who's ever lived. He was also put in position to be a great cornerback. And Bowden just knew how to get the most out of whoever he had. It was beautiful to watch.
Last thing for me, I don't know if Corey has anything else, and we'll let you go. But I really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Sure.
Did you have a feeling at the end of that season? I'm sure you've been asked this a lot of time. I mean, obviously the program was heading in the right direction overall, but did you have any sense that, man, this thing's really about to take off when you were done with that season?
Well, actually, it did win a silver medal at the New York Video and Film Festival, the international festival.
Nice.
For the second best documentary in the country.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I think I knew we had something special. When I was putting it together, I didn't do any editing. I waited till the season was over to start editing. So all I had was the experiences I had through the season. When I sat down and I got through about the first 10 minutes, I remember calling my director, Mike Dunn, into the editing room, and I said, you need to see this. And we looked at, it was the actual shovel pass video. And I think we knew right then that we had something remarkable. And I don't know, I could have gone to 100 other coaches and not gotten anything close to this. It was the right guy at the right time with no reins on him yet. He was just the barn door was open and he was running full speed. And so I think it was the right intersection of he's beginning to understand it and we got to be there to see it. It all just came together.
It's really cool. I like the Gator Bowl. They play Oklahoma State, who had Thurman Thomas. They also had Barry Sanders, but he was like
a great team. Yeah.
But he was just a kick return guy. But Thurman Thomas, he's saying we don't want him to start his Heisman run for next year because they had just played. Bo Jackson won his Heisman in some part because of what he did to Florida State.
Defense, are you going to let that tailback win the Heisman Trophy off of his game tonight? Is this the game that starts their tailback in the pursuit of the Heisman Trophy for next year? Don't you dare let him start it against you. You hold that guy to minimum yards.
And then I really thought it was cool at halftime when he's meeting with his coaches. And I think it's the only time we see him at halftime in the coaches' locker room talking about what they're going to say to the team or what adjustments they're going to make. And John Eason brings up,
in 2 games, Coach, Miami, we were up 10 points on Miami at the half, and they came back and beat us. And also against North Carolina, we stunk up the field the first half. Oklahoma State is doing the same thing, but we came back and beat North Carolina.
Right. 2 good points.
And sure enough, Bowden goes in there and makes that exact same speech. And again, I think that you have to be secure in who you are to let an assistant coach give you a talking point like that and say, you know what, that's a good idea, write it down and do it. I just think, again, he comes off looking so good. And I know that wasn't the intent. It wasn't like we're going to paint Bobby Bowden to be an angel. It just, I just, again, I can't stress it. Like the guy that you know from the 2000s and the 90s, it's really neat to see him right before he becomes that guy and who he still was.
Yeah, I hear that. I have to tell you, I left that season with the feeling that the bowl game was not as significant to him as losing to Auburn, Miami, and Florida.
Right.
I mean, and it became clear to me that those games, as we learned over the years, were more important than any bowl game, with, I guess, the possible exception of the national championship games. But I mean, those games to him were his Super Bowl every single year. And not just because of how they played out across the state, because he really, really wanted to beat those guys every single time. So I think he's just more relaxed. When he's playing Oklahoma State, I mean, he wants to win the game and he's serious about it, but I just think he's more chill. At least that's what I saw. Yeah. That's an interesting observation.
So you were in Tallahassee at the time. I was a Florida State fan, but I was 10 living in Atlanta. But I do remember my dad maybe not being totally on board with Bowden after the 86 season. I think they went 6-4-1. They lost to Florida again. That was a driving rainstorm. Lost to Miami again. That was a great Miami team. But so was there – and then he didn't take the Alabama job. But where was the Florida State fan base in 1985, 86 in regards to Bobby Bowden? I know everybody loves him now but the dynasty hadn't happened yet. And he was 6 years removed from those Orange Bowls. So where was the fan base? And was there any pressure at all on him in those years?
Yeah, I definitely think there was some pressure, not like it was later on. I think it was just the beginning of the fan base swelling, and it was a reason guys like Burt Reynolds were coming in the locker room and coming into his office. I mean, it was happening. It was the birth of everything that happened. I honestly think that Nebraska game, that 18-14 win in Nebraska, was the birth of the corner being turned. I mean, that was kind of like it was. You could just sort of feel something remarkable was going to happen. And just because you brought up Bo Jackson, I really felt like he should have thanked me at his Heisman speech for giving them all the plays.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a big win.
He would not have had that 74-yard touchdown
run
had I not allowed him to hear those plays.
Sure, absolutely.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, Gary.
Hey, thanks, Floyd. It was a lot of fun.
And you've got a book recently coming out or coming out?
Driving the Road of Life with a Flat Tire. You can get it all over the place. And I got another one coming out called Banana Peel Boulevard, which ought to tell you everything it's about. So, hey, love what you guys do. Big fan.
Thank you. Have you? By the way, I wanted to ask, have you watched it lately?
Yeah.
The documentary?
I watched it about 8 or 9 months ago.
Man, I'm telling you, and again, it was because I was a kid, but it makes me so nostalgic and wistful. Just to have a head coach like that meandering through a motel parking lot in Thomasville, Georgia at night saying, hey, man, hey, what's up, buddy? It just, nothing was, it was serious. It was big time college football.
But it was innocent.
There was just I don't know, like a warmth about it that seems to be missing now. And it really made me nostalgic.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. There are some things that have been lost in this different kind of social media environment. But I think one of the reasons it happened as quickly as it did was because of what had happened before it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was there for 0-11.
Yeah.
I was there with Larry Jones and Chicken Wire. And so I think folks wanted something to happen, and it looked like it was going to happen with him. So warmth and hugging and establishing something remarkable was just right there for the taking. He was the right guy.
Awesome. It's really like a living time. The movie is like a time capsule. It really takes you back to the time. And the great thing is, no matter whatever happens, we'll always have that, and we'll always be able to access it and go back in time. And I encourage people to go back and watch it. There's clips. People could see clips during this interview, but also you can go watch the entire thing. But thanks a lot, Gary. I'm glad you made the.
Take care.
I'm glad you made the pitch 35 years ago, and thanks for
Yeah.
taking the time to talk to us today.
Was it 35 years?
35
Oh,
years.
I shoot. And you know what? I bet you he can still beat me in golf.
Oh, yeah, right.
I played with him a couple times. I played with him. I never got to see him. I'm over in this rough and that rough. He goes down 150 yards, 150
Yep,
yards.
that's right down the middle.
Yep. Take care, boys.
Take care. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.